The fluorescent lights of Wellington's, one of Chicago's finest restaurants, cast a glare on the marble floor, cold and mirror bright. The small figure of Grace Monroe emerged silently as she bent down to wipe clean the last table after a shift that had stretched over 12 hours. The soles of her leather shoes were worn through, revealing toes purpled by the cold. Her white uniform was now dotted with stains of sauce, wine, and sweat. Another glamorous night in the paradise of the rich. Miranda, the head waitress, remarked sarcastically as she counted a thick wad of tips. Her eyes landed on the few small bills in Grace's tray, a smirk tugging at her lips. "Grace, honey, you need to learn how to please those men with deep pockets, a smile, a shorter skirt. You get it?" Grace didn't respond. She simply folded a napkin in silence, as if each crease was an attempt to keep her own pride from crumbling. From the back of the kitchen, the clang of metal pans and the shouting of Chef Marcus still echoed. But Grace's gaze snuck toward one person, the new kitchen assistant named Nathan, who had been working diligently for the past 2 weeks, yet about whom almost no one knew anything. He was always quiet, never complained, and there was something off about him. Unlike the men who usually looked at her with hungry eyes, Nathan looked at her as if observing something deeply puzzling, a gaze that was almost pained. The expensive watch hidden behind a hastily rolled-up sleeve, and the calloused hands that didn't seem to belong to a kitchen worker, these were details Grace didn't miss. But she had no time for suspicion. She had something more important to do. Grace walked toward the kitchen, her hands clenched together. She took a deep breath. The smell of roasted garlic and herbs filled the air, making her heart ache with the memory of her mother. Those warm dinners were now only a memory. "Chef Marcus," she began, her voice trembling. "We're cleaning up. Grace, what is it?" I just wanted to ask if there are any leftovers. Could I take them home?" The kitchen fell silent. Miranda let out a derisive laugh from the doorway. "Oh my God! Here we go again. If you're that broke, why not get a second job instead of eating leftovers like a stray dog?" Grace swallowed the humiliation, but she didn't bow her head. "I'm not begging. I'm just asking that if no one is going to eat it, don't throw it away." Marcus, the old, notoriously stern chef, looked at her, then sighed. "There's still some white bean soup and a few loaves of bread. Thank you so much." Grace's voice was as faint as a whisper. Nathan stood there, still holding a paring knife. But his eyes never left Grace. It wasn't out of curiosity. It was something else, a wound that had just been laid bare before his eyes, and it wouldn't let him look away. By the time Grace walked out of the restaurant, clutching an old cloth bag to her chest like a treasure, everyone had returned to their clean-up routine as if nothing had happened. Only Nathan remained, standing there in silence, and a few minutes later, as she climbed onto her rickety old bicycle to leave, he also left the kitchen, walking quickly toward the back door. No one knew who owned the expensive black car parked out of sight behind the lot. And no one knew that the man who had been chopping vegetables and washing dishes for the past 2 weeks was actually CEO Nathan Carlisle, the founder of the $800 million Wellington's restaurant chain. But even he never expected that this undercover mission would bring him face to face with an old debt he thought had been buried for 15 years. A debt now being borne by none other than Grace, the woman who had just been berated for begging for leftovers. The rickety bicycle rolled slowly through the drizzling night rain. Grace hunched over, pedaling hard, trying to keep the cloth bag with the soup from spilling out of the front basket. Her thin shirt, soaked through, clung to her slender frame, which shivered with each gust of the cold spring wind. Behind her, a black sedan drove slowly, its headlights dimmed, keeping a safe enough distance to remain undetected. Nathan gripped the steering wheel, his heart heavy with conflict. This was perhaps the most serious invasion of privacy he had ever committed. But the look in Grace's eyes as she held that bag of food as if she were holding on to life itself had made it impossible for him to sit still. She didn't turn toward the city center, where restaurant staff usually shared apartments reeking of parties and crammed with people. She pedaled away from the city, through an old industrial zone, past rows of houses with their curtains drawn and lights out early. A street named Ashwood appeared like a scar on the map, old apartment buildings with cardboard-taped windows, broken iron gates, and a few scattered, malfunctioning street lights. Grace stopped in front of a building named Ashwood Commons, a name that sounded like a cruel joke. The rusty stairs creaked under her footsteps. Nathan parked across the street, watching in silence. She disappeared onto the second-floor door. 2C. He sat in the car, wondering, should he continue? Was it worth it? But then, a thought sparked in his mind. What would make a young, healthy woman with a decent job have to beg for leftovers and cherish them like a treasure? Nathan got out of the car and crossed the street in the thin rain. The smell of dampness and sewage rising from the hallway almost made him turn back. But then he heard a soft laugh as faint as a thread. Moving closer, through a gap in a frosted window, he saw Grace sitting on the edge of a bed, where a young girl lay listlessly under a threadbare blanket. "I brought soup. Chloe." Grace's voice was as gentle as a lullaby as she opened the cloth bag and took out the still warm container of soup. "White bean soup, your favorite. Mum used to make it just like this when we were little. Remember?" Chloe, the girl in the blanket, smiled weakly. She was very young, perhaps just over 18. Her eyes were sunken, her skin was so pale it was almost translucent, and her lips were dry and trembled slightly from a fever. But her eyes, they were clear and full of trust. "You shouldn't beg for food for me, Grace," Chloe whispered. "I'm not worth it." Grace leaned down, placing a hand on her sister's forehead. "Hush now. You're worth more than anyone. You're the only reason I get up every morning." From outside, Nathan stood as if turned to stone. The questions that had been swirling in his head were now swept away by a hurricane of understanding. Grace wasn't hungry. She hadn't eaten a single spoonful. Every moment of humility, every insult she endured, it was all to bring a bowl of soup to her gravely ill sister waiting in a dilapidated apartment. He turned to leave, but his feet wouldn't move. Chloe. The name suddenly rang in his head like a faint bell. Something was familiar, very familiar. His hands clenched into fists. In the rain, amidst the flickering streetlights and the distant sound of car horns, a fractured piece of memory began to emerge. Once, there was another girl whose name started with a C, who had also risked her life to save someone. But the memory wasn't clear yet. There was only one thing Nathan knew for sure: Grace was not a girl to be pitied. She was a warrior. And Chloe, the person lying quietly in that room, might just be the reason this all began. And that night, the CEO, who had been washing dishes in disguise, couldn't sleep. That entire night, Nathan couldn't get a wink of sleep. He returned to his penthouse apartment on the 42nd floor, where every large glass window was like a work of art depicting the Chicago skyline at night. But for the first time in years, he saw nothing but a single face, pale, fragile, and frighteningly familiar. The face of Chloe Monroe. He stood in the darkness, staring at an untouched glass of whiskey, his phone lying silently on the table beside it. His hand trembled slightly. His heart pounded. Chloe. That name wasn't just Grace's sister. It was an echo from a day 15 years ago when a 22-year-old man, drunk on his own ambition, nearly drowned in the icy waters of a treacherous river bend called Devil's Bend in a suburb of Michigan. That day, Nathan, then a Harvard Business School student, was on spring break. He was showing off to his girlfriend, paddling a kayak into the swirling rapids as if it were a game. It all happened too fast. The kayak flipped, a strap wrapping around his leg. The freezing river water slammed into his face, his chest, his mouth. Everything became a silent scream. Nathan remembered it clearly, the feeling of suffocation, his legs kicking, his hands grasping at the water, but finding only white foam. And then, that small hand, thin but strong. It decisively pulled at the strap, freeing him. A small figure had dived into the current like an angel appearing from the darkness. He clearly remembered the look in the girl's eyes as they both surfaced, shivering. Exhausted, but she still managed to say, "You're okay now." That was it. And then, she vanished before the rescue team arrived. No one knew who she was. No one recognized the 16-year-old hero. Flyers, announcements. Even a private investigator had turned up nothing. After a few months, the memory became a story told over drinks, an old tale he kept to soothe himself. Until tonight, Nathan shot to his feet. He rushed to his storage room, pulling out an old, dusty box labeled "College Personal" from the very bottom. He pulled out a 4x6-inch photograph. It was blurry, the colors faded to yellow, but it was still clear: a girl with wet hair, skinny, a t-shirt clinging to her from the water, standing beside the overturned kayak and offering the faintest of smiles amidst the chaos. Those eyes, those cheekbones, that smile. It was Chloe, the girl who was only 16 then, now, 15 years later, was lying motionless in a squalid apartment, her skin as pale as wax. because of a genetic disease inherited from her parents, because there wasn't enough money for treatment, and the only person keeping her from the abyss was Grace, the one who begged for leftover soup, who endured every insult to keep her sister alive for one more day. A surge of anger rose in Nathan, not at anyone else, but at himself. While he was signing multi-million-dollar deals, Chloe, the person who had risked her life to save him, was lying on her deathbed, while he had every opportunity in life. Grace had given up college to work as a waitress, just to keep her sister alive for one more day. Dawn broke over the city, but Nathan saw no light. In his mind, only two things remained clear. First, Chloe was the benefactor to whom he owed his life. Second, Grace was the strongest woman he had ever met, but she was fighting a silent, lonely battle, hour by hour, and it was time for him to repay that debt, but not with money, with action, with the truth, and by giving them both a chance to live again. The next evening, Wellington's was once again ablaze with light, a stage where extravagant performances were repeated. But tonight, something was a little different. Grace walked into the restaurant and was assigned to serve the private dining area, a section usually reserved for veteran staff with polished communication skills and the ability to handle difficult clients. She was stunned. This wasn't the shift she had signed up for. She didn't have enough seniority. Miranda whistled contemptuously. Well, what's your secret?" Grace smiled at the right frequency for someone. Grace just lowered her head, not responding. But a sense of unease grew inside her. Why, recently? Had she been getting better shifts, more preferential positions? Why was everything suddenly easier than usual? She started to observe, and naturally, the first person she suspected was Nathan. At the same time, in the kitchen, Nathan was dicing celery, trying to act normal. But in reality, he had asked Marcus, the head chef, to assign Grace to the private room tonight. She deserved the higher tips. She needed them. For Chloe. And most importantly, he wanted to create an opportunity for her without hurting her pride. But he had miscalculated. In the middle of the shift, when the kitchen had a moment of quiet, Grace walked up to Nathan, her hands clenched. "Nathan, can you step outside and talk to me for a few minutes?" They went out to the back alley where a faint yellow light cast their shadows on the stained brick wall. Grace stood there, her eyes looking straight ahead, her shoulders tense. "I know you were the one who suggested to Marcus that he give me the better shift." Nathan was about to deny it, but her gaze cut through any excuse. Tony overheard. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Silence. "Do you think I'm weak, pathetic? Do you want to be the hero who saves me from this job?" Grace's voice was choked, yet still firm. "I don't need anyone to fight my battles for me. Nathan, I've stood on my own 2 feet for years, and I'll continue to do so." Nathan took a deep breath, his voice low. "I don't think you're weak. On the contrary, I've never seen anyone as strong as you." "Then let me fight my own battles." She turned to walk away. "Grace, wait." He took a step forward. I see you struggling. I want to help. Not out of pity, but because you deserve to be helped." She stopped, but didn't turn around. "The problem is, you don't understand what I've sacrificed to keep this pride. The moment I accept help from an unknown source, I'm not myself anymore." That night, Nathan sat silently in the kitchen after everyone else had gone home. He looked at his hands, the hands that Chloe had pulled from the cold water all those years ago, and wondered, how do you save someone who doesn't want to be saved? He couldn't use money. He couldn't use power. There was only one way left to truly understand her, and to start with the deepest pain she was hiding. That night, Nathan didn't return to his penthouse. He drove around aimlessly for 3 hours, stopping at a deserted 24/7 coffee shop where he opened his laptop and started typing. The first name he entered into the Carlyle Group's internal search engine was Grace Monroe. She had told Marcus that she had previously applied for an office job. Nathan wanted to verify it as a way of keeping a promise to himself. If there had ever been a chance to help Grace sooner, he had to find it. The system returned a result in seconds. Grace Monroe, application for management trainee program, junior year of college, State University, GPA 3.9, letters of recommendation from the dean and a professor. Nathan read the file, his heart aching as if it were being squeezed. She was the ideal candidate, intelligent, hard-working, passionate about education, had even volunteered for a literacy program in the poor South Loop neighborhood, and yet her application had been rejected. Reason: lack of management experience. It was a robotic, cold rejection, and Nathan knew for a fact it wasn't right. He dug deeper into the internal email system, a server secured exclusively for the leadership team. The first name that appeared sent a chill down his spine: Robert Maxwell, Senior Vice President of Human Resources for the Hotel and Culinary Division. The man who had directly overseen the trainee program 3 years ago. An email chain appeared, and in the middle was irrefutable evidence. $10,000 if Vanden's grandson gets approved in the first round. Push Grace Monroe out. Use the reason: not enough experience. Good profile, but not important. Not the chosen candidate. Nathan was stunned. He scrolled down. Dozens of other names had also been removed from the system for not buying a spot. Grace had a chance. A full-time job, a career path, health insurance. She had been on the right track with all her effort and dreams. Until someone within the very company he founded had stolen that from her, just to slot someone's relative in her place. Nathan clenched his fists, his eyes bloodshot. Just 2 weeks after her application was rejected, Grace dropped out of college, and 1 month later, her parents died in an accident. No one knew that this blow was the beginning of a chain of collapse. Nathan stood up and left the coffee shop. The rain began to fall. He didn't use an umbrella. In front of the Carlyle Group building that morning, he called his personal assistant. Prepare for an emergency meeting with the entire executive board within 3 hours. But, sir, you didn't give any notice. Just do it, or you're fired. 3 hours later, the entire board of directors was present. Surprised, chilling. Nathan threw the evidence onto the screen. Robert Maxwell has been taking bribes. He has blocked the opportunities of dozens of talented candidates. No one spoke. A few lowered their heads. A few looked bewildered. A young woman named Grace Monroe. She should have been the marketing manager for our hotel chain. Now she's washing dishes in a restaurant because her parents are dead. Her sister is critically ill, and our company indirectly caused that to happen. A chief financial officer spoke up. How do you want to handle this? Fire Maxwell. Nathan looked straight ahead. Fire him, press criminal charges, and compensate everyone who was wrongfully rejected. Call them back. Pay them their original salary, plus 20% for each year they lost. That will cost millions, someone whispered. So be it, Nathan said, emphasizing every word. I'm not losing my reputation. I'm losing something far more important, the trust of a woman to whom I owe my life. That night, Nathan returned to Wellington's, watching Grace from a distance. She still smiled at customers, still stood tall, still remained composed. But he knew that behind that smile were years of struggle. And now he knew the reason he himself unintentionally had been part of that chain of oppression, not because he was a bad person, but because he didn't know. And it was time to make things right. Late at night at Wellington's, Grace had just stepped into the employee break room when her phone rang. It was from North Shore Medical Center, the place where she had begged for flexible payment plans for Chloe's new treatment. She stood frozen as she listened to the person on the other end. Her eyes were wide, unblinking. Her hand trembled as if she were holding something too fragile. I'm sorry, you said the treatment has been sponsored. Yes. A non-profit organization selected your sister's case. They wish to remain anonymous, but have paid the full cost for a 6-month course of therapy. No, there must be some mistake. It's completely legitimate, Ms. Grace. You can come in tomorrow to begin the tests and adjust the regimen. Grace sank into a chair, speechless. But in her heart it wasn't joy, it was suspicion. That evening, in the kitchen after closing time, Nathan saw Grace arranging silverware, but her movements lacked their usual calm. Her shoulders were unusually tense. Grace. He approached, his voice gentle. She looked up. A medical organization just paid for Chloe's entire treatment. Do you know anything about this? Nathan tried to keep his expression neutral. No. But maybe they saw that your case deserved help. Grace narrowed her eyes at him, the eyes that were once full of gratitude, now clouded with suspicion. You know very well I don't accept charity. So why did this strange thing happen, right when everything else in my life is also coincidentally getting better, like this? Nathan fell silent. He had prepared so many explanations, but none of them were true enough without revealing everything. Finally, he said softly, there are people out there who still believe that good people deserve good things in return. Grace let out a bitter laugh. Sounds like something out of a morality textbook. Then she leaned closer, her voice low but firm. I've been supporting myself since I was 19, taking care of my sick sister since I was 22. I don't need charity from strangers. and I certainly don't need a man pulling the strings behind the scenes and pretending he's uninvolved." Nathan's hands tightened into fists as he tried to remain calm. "Grace, you're building a wall between yourself and any hand that wants to help. Why?" She looked him straight in the eye. "Because when I accept help without knowing the reason, I become a debtor, and I'm already in debt for too many things. I don't want to owe another anonymous kindness." She took a step back, as if he were a threat. "If you really have nothing to do with this, I apologize for my suspicion. But if you do, if you're the one behind all of this, stop it. Immediately." Nathan wanted to say, "I'm doing this because you deserve it. Because Chloe saved me. Because I owe you my life." But he couldn't. Because saying it now would kill the self-respect that Grace had preserved with blood and tears. Grace left the kitchen. But Nathan didn't move. He felt as though he had just lost a battle, even though all he wanted was to do the right thing. How do you help someone when they see it as pity? How do you save someone when they feel controlled, not in charge of their own destiny? He understood now. He didn't just have to find a way to repay Chloe. He had to find a way to give the power of choice back to Grace, even if that meant withdrawing from all his plans to help. The next afternoon, the Carlyle Group office on Michigan Avenue was flooded with light. But the atmosphere in the 38th floor conference room was as heavy as lead. All the executive directors, heads of HR, and legal were present. They had never seen Nathan so serious. No coffee, no smiles, no polite opening remarks. Just a file folder thrown onto the table. "This is a list of 41 candidates who were rejected from the management trainee program over the past 6 years. Among them, 23 had outstanding profiles, and all of them were rejected for the same type of reason: lack of experience." The reality? Nathan looked up, his eyes like daggers. They didn't put money in Robert Maxwell's pocket. No one dared to breathe loudly. Nathan pressed the remote. The screen lit up with internal emails between Maxwell and various intermediaries, wire transfer codes, coded names. Everything was no longer suspicion. It was incriminating evidence. The head of legal, David, spoke, his voice low. "This, if it goes public, it will trigger a wave of lawsuits from the rejected candidates. We could lose millions of dollars in compensation." "So be it," Nathan said coldly. "Better that than losing the core value this company was built on: fair opportunity." The female director of operations, Jennifer, hesitated. "So you intend to call every single person on this list, including Grace Monroe, the one working as a restaurant employee?" "Yes, and by now, she should have been running an entire hotel complex." No one laughed. Nathan continued, "I don't want to compensate anyone. I want them to know they were betrayed, and that we are ready to make it right. With Grace," he paused, his voice dropping, "I want to personally deliver the apology." The room was dead silent, not because they were afraid, but because they had never seen a CEO use the word apology in front of the leadership council. Nathan turned to the legal department. I also want Maxwell prosecuted, criminally. We can't let him walk away with a 7-figure pension and a handshake." David swallowed. "I'll work with the financial investigators today." Nathan nodded, then pushed his chair back and stood up. "Just one more time. I want to repeat, I did not build Carlyle Group for it to become a machine designed to filter the poor out of the system. If I find anyone else engaging in corruption, don't wait for me to fire you. Walk out of this building yourself." That afternoon, Nathan sat in his office, looking out at Millennium Park in the distance. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a CEO, not like a successful man. He was just a man trying to mend the cracks his own system had caused in a young woman's life. A woman who had wanted to be a teacher but had to wash dishes to save her sick sister. His phone rang. It was Jennifer, her voice urgent. "Nathan, there's something else. Grace Monroe once applied for a company scholarship to complete her college degree after she dropped out, but her application was also rejected. That year, the person who reviewed it was also Maxwell." Nathan closed his eyes. Another blow. Not just the job opportunity. She had tried to come back, to learn, to start over. But she was blocked. Again. Everything Grace could have become had been buried by a single man under the guise of selection policy. And Nathan, though he hadn't done it directly, was the one who had let it happen. He opened his email. He composed his first message to Grace. "I need to see you, not as a colleague, but as someone who owes you a debt. You deserve to hear the truth." He hadn't hit send yet, because something was still holding him back. Grace didn't need an apology. She needed a reason to believe that kindness wasn't a trap. And Nathan knew he had to give her that in a way that would make her choose to walk through the door to a new life herself. Not forced, not pitied, but through the truth itself. 2 weeks passed. Chloe began to respond well to the treatment. The color returned to her cheeks, and her smile, a smile Grace thought she would never see again, appeared more often. The small apartment in Ashwood Commons suddenly felt unusually warm, not because of new furniture or money, but because of hope. That afternoon, as Grace was making soup, Chloe spoke up. "Have you noticed lately, everything feels like it's being arranged?" Grace stopped what she was doing. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. It's just, you're getting promoted to better shifts constantly. I suddenly get treatment sponsorship. Everything is happening as if someone is directing every step." Grace was silent. She felt it too. And that feeling didn't bring her relief. It brought unease. She remembered the look in Nathan's eyes every time she talked about Chloe's illness, the way he seemed to be carrying his own pain, as if he were atoning for something. She also remembered their recent confrontation, when she asked him about the medical sponsorship and he avoided her gaze. The more she thought about it, the colder her heart grew. That night, at Wellington's, just as closing time hit, Grace waited for Nathan by the back entrance. "We need to talk." He looked at her. His eyes couldn't hide his exhaustion, not from work, but from keeping a secret for too long. "Grace, Before you ask, let me say something first. I'm not who you think I am. Then, who are you? A beat of silence. Nathan took a wallet from his jacket pocket and pulled out an old employee ID card, silver and black, with the name Nathan Carlisle, CEO, Carlisle Group. Grace said nothing. Her eyes were fixed on the card, as if its disappearance could make everything go back to the way it was. He continued, his voice low and true. I wasn't pretending to deceive you. I went undercover as a kitchen assistant to understand the lives of our frontline employees. And then I met you. It wasn't planned, but you made me stop. Grace still hadn't moved. Her hands were clenched tightly. So everything, the priority shifts, the private room, the medical sponsorship. It was all from you. Nathan nodded, his eyes welling up. It's not because I pity you. It's because I owe a debt. What debt? He pulled a faded photograph from his wallet, an old picture from 15 years ago. A drenched young girl stood by a riverbank, a tired smile on her face after just saving a life. This is Chloe, when she was 16. She saved me from drowning at Pine River. I didn't know her name. I couldn't find her. Until that night, when I saw her lying in that hospital bed in your apartment. Grace's voice faltered. No, that's not possible. I swear, it was her. Those eyes, that face. And when I heard her name, it was like my memory was torn wide open. Grace gasped for air. The fragments of long evenings, of nights begging for food, of moments spent crying in secret, now played back like a reversed film, and the starting point was Chloe. And this man, Nathan went on, his voice breaking. You let me and my sister live in the dark, while you had everything, not because you were bad, but because you didn't know. And when I knew, I couldn't turn away anymore. Grace stepped back, her hand on her chest. She didn't know if she was angry, shocked, or hurt. She only knew her world had just turned 180 degrees. You knew everything, and didn't tell me from the beginning because I was afraid you would refuse. Afraid you would think this was charity. But this isn't a handout. This is a debt I've carried for 15 years. And now, I'm only asking you for one thing. What is it? Don't deny me the right to repay my debt. In the small alley behind the restaurant, the place where Grace used to quietly leave after an exhausting shift, now became the place where a secret that had lain dormant for 15 years was revealed, a truth both chilling and sacred. Grace didn't answer. She only said softly, I need time. And then she walked away, leaving Nathan standing there, caught between the two dimensions of past and present, his hand still holding the old photograph like a confession. 6 months later, early autumn sunlight streamed through the glass window of the new apartment on Maple Ridge Street, where Grace and Chloe had just moved in. The apartment wasn't luxurious, but it was cozy, clean, and most importantly, it belonged to them. Chloe sat by the window, her long hair loosely tied to one side, her hand gliding lightly over a watercolor palette. She was painting a park near their home, a place she had been going to teach children how to paint on weekends for the past few weeks. The color had returned to her cheeks, and the bluish shadows under her eyes were now just faint traces. She was no longer the girl who lay listlessly waiting for a bowl of soup each night. She was living, truly living. Grace walked in, setting a basket of freshly bought vegetables on the kitchen counter. She wore the professional black uniform of Wellington's flagship, where she now held the position of service supervisor. Her shifts were more flexible, the pay was double, and for the first time in years, she had full health insurance. "You're back," Chloe smiled, her eyes not leaving the painting. "Yeah, and guess who just sent an email confirming my re-enrollment application?" Chloe whipped her head around. "No, yes, the University of Chicago, the bachelor's degree completion program in education, a partial scholarship," Grace said, then pretended to frown. "I wonder who could be behind this." They were both silent for a moment. Then Chloe said, "Are you still angry with him?" Grace looked up. In her eyes was a sad smile, but it was no longer sharp-edged. "I'm not angry that he helped. I was just angry because I felt I wasn't given a choice. Everything happened as if my life was being rewritten by someone else's hand." But now Chloe asked, gently. Grace looked out the window, where yellow leaves were sparsely falling. "Now, I realize, some people don't want to make your decisions for you. They just quietly stand behind you so that when you're ready to step forward, you won't fall again." That evening, a small event was held at the headquarters of a newly established non-profit organization named Second Chance's Kitchen. On a simple backdrop hung a banner that read, "No one should have to beg for leftovers." Nathan stood on a small stage, no suit, no tie, just a simple shirt with rolled-up sleeves. Beside him were Chef Marcus, Miranda, and even the frontline staff who had once worked with him. "The idea for this organization," Nathan began, "didn't come from me. It came from a woman who once asked for a bowl of soup, not for herself, but for the one she loved." The whole hall fell silent. She didn't know then that someone was watching and was moved forever. From the third row, Grace sat next to Chloe, silent. Nathan continued, "Second Chance's Kitchen will partner with 14 restaurant chains, collecting unused food at the end of the day and redistributing it in the form of nutritious meals. No conditions, no questions asked, because no one should have to choose between their dignity and survival." Chloe turned to Grace, whispering, "You were right. He doesn't want to save you. He just wants to walk alongside you." Grace nodded, not replying, but in her eyes there was a tenderness that Nathan had waited so long to see again. At the end of the evening, when most of the guests had left, Nathan stepped down, holding 2 cups of hot cocoa. Grace was waiting in the hallway, her hands in her jacket pockets. "I still owe you a thank you," Nathan said. Grace smiled faintly. "No, you owed Chloe, and you've paid that debt. As for me," she paused, then looked directly at him. "I don't need anyone to save me, but I won't turn away someone who is sincere." "I didn't come to save you," Nathan replied. "I came to learn how to stand beside you." a beat of silence. Then they returned to the room where Chloe was cleaning her watercolors. No background music was needed, no promises of the future. Just three people who had walked through devastation, now standing together under one roof and knowing for sure tomorrow they would no longer be alone. An early autumn breeze drifted across the small balcony of the third-floor apartment. Chicago was unusually quiet tonight. In the distance, at Miller's Grove Park, a few kids were still playing a late game of soccer, the yellow lights casting shadows on the walls like faint echoes of a childhood not yet faded. On that balcony, three people sat around a small tea table Chloe was knitting. Grace rested her chin on her hand, gazing into the distance, and Nathan was quietly making ginger tea. Chloe looked up, her eyes brighter than usual. "I've wanted to say this for a long time, but I waited until I was sure." Grace and Nathan both looked over at her. Chloe smiled faintly, her hands still looping the yarn. "I remember now. Pine River, the flood, and the person I pulled to shore that day." Nathan gripped the arm of his chair lightly. "I only remembered fragments before." Chloe continued, the roar of the water, my hands numb from the cold, and the panicked face of someone struggling. "But today, when I saw the photograph you brought, and the way you said my name, it all came back like a film. I remember your eyes clearly, and the way you thanked me between gasps of breath, right after you survived." Grace took her sister's hand. "And you know what?" Nathan spoke up, his eyes slightly red. "I spent my entire youth wondering if I had imagined it, or if I was really saved by a small, tenacious 16-year-old girl." Chloe let out a soft laugh. "Not tenacious at all. I was scared to death back then, but I knew if I didn't do something, you would die, and that death, it wouldn't have been right." Silence fell for a moment. I didn't know that 15 years later, I would be lying in a hospital bed, and the very person I saved would be the one to save me in return. Grace smiled, her eyes glistening. "Life comes full circle, more than we think." Nathan placed his hand on the table, and for the first time, he took Grace's hand, not rushed, not trembling. For the first time, I think that maybe the invisible threads we thought were broken were actually just waiting to pull us back to where we belong. Grace squeezed his hand gently, and for the first time in my life, I don't see leaning on someone as a weakness, but as a right to choose. Chloe stood up, gathering her yarn, and said in a mock-joking tone, "All right, you two can continue your sentimental moment. I'm going to make more tea." Nathan and Grace both laughed. The three of them, once three broken fates, now sat under the balcony light, knowing one thing for certain: none of them had been saved. They had saved each other, and more importantly, they had chosen to stay by each other's side, not out of debt, not out of gratitude, but because they had become a family, in the strangest, most sincere way. At the Lincoln Hall Community Center, a simple yet dignified auditorium had been arranged to welcome the official launch of Second Chance's Kitchen, the charitable organization founded by Nathan Carlisle, inspired by a woman who asked for soup and a girl who had once saved his life. Warm stage lighting fell upon the white logo, with a simple slogan: no one deserves to go hungry just because they chose to keep their dignity. Grace sat in the front row, in a modest grey coat. Chloe sat beside her, her hair gently curled, her eyes sparkling. Nathan walked onto the stage. No notes, no podium, just words from his heart. I used to think that successful people were those who climbed the highest mountain, but now I understand. Success is knowing how to go back to the path you once ignored, to help those who have fallen get back on their feet. Second chances. Kitchen will partner with over 20 restaurants and hotel chains across the city, collecting tons of unused food each week, reprocessing it into nutritious meals to be given to families living in poverty, who have never lost their dignity. Applause filled the room, but then he paused, his eyes looking down at one person. And that idea didn't come from me. It came from her. He pointed to Grace, his voice choked with emotion. The woman who used to work the night shift, asking for leftover soup just to feed her sister, in silence and with pride. Grace stood up, without hesitation, without fear. She bowed to the crowd, and in that moment, everyone knew she was no longer the woman hiding in the restaurant kitchen. She was an inspiration. After the ceremony, when everyone had left, Nathan, Grace, and Chloe remained in the empty auditorium. Chloe opened an invitation letter from the Art Institute of Chicago, where she had just been accepted into the Community Art Therapy program. She would be teaching art to children in poor neighborhoods, something she had dreamed of but never dared to think possible. "They didn't just accept me," she whispered. "They gave me a chance to turn pain into healing." Grace smiled, her eyes sparkling. "And I have good news too." Nathan was surprised. "I'm back in school. The complete teaching program, 2 years. Evening classes, morning shifts. And I have to write an essay every week. Can you believe it?" All three of them laughed. Amidst that laughter, Nathan knew he had witnessed a miracle, not one of money or fame, but of the determination to live well even when no one was watching. He reached into his bag and took out a wooden plaque. He handed it to Grace. On it was engraved the words, "This started with a bowl of soup." Grace looked at the plaque, then at Nathan. For the first time, her guard was completely down. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's not because you have money, and it's not because you owe me anything. It's because you chose to stay when others would have walked away." And in the middle of the auditorium hall, only 3 people remained, standing together, no one saving anyone, no one owing anyone, just 3 once broken hearts, now beating in sync on a second journey. Sometimes, extraordinary things don't start with miracles, but with a bowl of soup, a hand extended at the right moment, or a gaze that doesn't turn away from another's pain. And if you ever wonder if kindness has any meaning in this cold world, remember, someone out there is still surviving because of one time you didn't look away, because no one deserves to be forgotten, and everyone deserves a second chance.